made them. Her team then did the unglamorous work. They fired and thrust replica wooden spears into ballistic gel and animal carcasses, hundreds of times, and compared the damage to the fossils. The match was not a thrown spear. It was a low-velocity thrust, delivered from close range. In one case, the angle runs upward through the pelvis, which is where a spear goes if you are crouched low and the deer is standing over you. Somebody hid in the reeds at the edge of that lake, let a deer walk to within touching distance, and pushed. You can guess what a life like that costs a skeleton. 1995, Thomas Berger and Eric Trinkaus took the injuries recorded on Neanderthal bones and compared the distribution against modern injury data from a range of occupations. Not the number of injuries, the pattern, where on the body they clustered. The closest match was rodeo riders, men whose work involves being thrown by large animals at close range. That image went everywhere, and it deserves a correction. In 2018, Judith Beyer and colleagues published a much larger comparison in Nature and found that Upper Paleolithic modern humans carried head trauma at about the same rate. So the rodeo pattern is probably not a Neanderthal fact. It looks like a hunting fact. It is what it cost anybody, of any species, to kill big animals with a wooden stick at contact range, which is a more useful thing to know. And it makes what happened at another German lake almost impossible to accept. 57 elephants. 2023 science advances Gaud Zinski-Winzer again. Working with Wilbur Brooks and Lutz Kindler, the site is Neumark-Nord 2, 125,000 years ago. At least 57 straight-tusked elephants. Paleo-Lox, Odon and T. Quuz, 4 meters at the shoulder, up to 13 tons. Cut marks across the bones. Not the scrappy, opportunistic marks of somebody stealing meat off a carcass a lion left. Systematic defleshing, including the fat pads inside the feet, which nobody removes unless they already know the fat is in there and they have the time and safety to go and get it. Then the detail that changes everything. Sex and age. Overwhelmingly prime adult males. Not calves, not the old, not the sick. Adult bulls in their strongest years, which is precisely the wrong answer if this is scavenging or luck. But it is exactly the right answer if it is a policy. Bull elephants live alone. Females live in herds with a matriarch and 30 relatives who will kill you. A solitary bull is the largest animal on that landscape, and the only one you can isolate. They were choosing the biggest possible animal because it was the safest possible animal to attack. You have probably already worked out the next part, and the research team took a long time before they were willing to write it down. Their estimate is that a single adult male yielded on the order of 2,500 daily food portions, 4,000 calories each. The standard textbook picture of a Neanderthal group is about 25 people. 25 people cannot eat 2,500 daily portions before the meat rots. Not in an interglacial summer. Not close. So either those groups were far bigger than anyone assumed, or they could preserve meat at scale, or both. And they did it at that one lake, again and again, across centuries. You still want to know how they actually killed one. There is a single object that answers it, and it was pulled out of the ground in 1948, lying between an elephant's ribs. Lehringen, Lower Saxony. Workers in a clay pit hit the skeleton of a straight-tusked elephant. In among the ribcage was a wooden shaft. About 2.4 meters long. The tip worked to a point and hardened. Scattered around the carcass, flint flakes, around 120,000 years old. Someone walked up to an animal weighing about as much as 2 delivery trucks and drove a sharpened stick into its chest. From a distance you could measure with your arms. Sit with how insane that is, and then notice the thing that makes it sane. That spear was never expected to kill the elephant. A wound in a 13-ton animal is not an ending. It is a clock. You open the animal, you back away, and then you follow it. For hours, sometimes for days. The spear starts a process. Your legs and your eyes finish it. The same idea turns up on the other side of the planet 10,000 years later, invented independently by people who had never heard of Europe. The Mani site, Washington State, a mastodon rib with something buried in it. Michael Waters and his colleagues put the rib through a CT scanner and published in Science in 2011. Inside the bone sat the broken tip of a projectile point, and the point was made of mastodon bone. 13,800 years old. sharpened bone from one mastodon, left inside the ribs of the next one. Wounding an animal in waiting has an obvious weakness. The animal gets hours to leave, unless you can make the waiting do the killing faster. Border Cave in South Africa, near the Eswatini border. Among the organic material recovered, there is a thin, notched wooden stick with a dark residue dried onto it. Francesco de Rico and colleagues ran the chemistry and published in 2012. The residue contained reisin-O-leic acid. That is the chemical signature of castor bean toxin. The stick is about 24,000 years old, and its shape is nearly identical to the poison applicators sand hunters were still using in the 20th century. The ethnography fills in what the chemistry cannot. Sand arrow poison is made from the larvae of Fiddy beetles, dug out of the sand beneath a particular kind of shrub at a particular stage of the insect's life, and the toxin destroys red blood cells. It works slowly, hours, sometimes days. Think about what a person has to know to do that. Which plant? Which grub under it? Which stage of the grub? Because the wrong stage does nothing. How to store it. How to keep it off the cuts on your own hands while you work. How to smear it behind the arrow tip rather than on it, so it does not wipe clean on the way through hide. That is a chemistry protocol, held entirely in heads, transmitted entirely by mouth, with no writing anywhere on Earth. And it changes what a weapon is for. Your arrow no longer has to kill a giraffe. It has to break skin and deliver about 1 milligram of something. Then you have to be able to find that giraffe again, 2 days later, in country, the size of a small nation. Which is why the poison and the tracking are not two technologies. They are one technology with two halves, and neither half works alone. Poison bought time. The next invention bought distance. The spear thrower is a hooked rod of antler or wood, roughly 1/2 meter long, that cups the butt end of a dart. The oldest surviving examples come from French sites like Combe-sur-Air, around 17,500 years old, and the idea is almost certainly older than the wood that happened to survive. It does not make you stronger. It makes your arm longer. Your hand travels through a longer arc, so the dart is accelerated for more time, so it leaves faster. That is the whole physics. A hand-thrown spear leaves the arm at something like 15 to 20 meters per second, and is reliable out to about 20 meters. Dart off a thrower goes considerably faster and roughly doubles the useful range. John Whitaker at Grishnell College has spent decades throwing them, timing them, and teaching people who have never held one. Ordinary humans with practice put darts into deer-sized targets at 30 meters. Why does doubling matter so much? Because a large animal has a reach measured in seconds. A charging lion covers 30 meters in about 2. A buffalo does not need to plan anything. The only question that matters in a hunt is whether the distance at which you can hurt it is greater than the distance across which it can arrive. 30 meters sits on the correct side of that line. 10 does not. The bow may be far older than any of it. Mar-Lise Lombard analyzed stone points from Sibudu Cave in KwaZulu-Natal from layers around 64,000 years old and found impact fractures and residue patterns that fit arrow tips rather than spear tips. Contested, as everything is at that depth. If it holds, the bow is tens of thousands of years older than the spear thrower. Every one of these inventions moves the killing further away from your body. The last one moved it out of anybody's hands entirely. Eastern Colorado. A place called Ol Sen Chub Uk, 10,000 years old. Joe Ben Wheat excavated it and published the full account in 1972, and it remains one of the most forensically detailed things ever recovered from prehistory. A dry gully, narrow, roughly 2 meters deep, packed with bison. Close to 200 of them. Bison and tekus, a heavier animal than the bison alive now. The layering tells the story in order. At the bottom, animals lying twisted and intact, crushed by the weight of everything that came in behind them. Above those, animals that were speared where they thrashed. Above those, animals dragged out and taken apart. Wheat reconstructed the butchery sequence, from how the bones were stacked, piece by piece, and he worked out which way the wind was blowing that day. Because the hunters had to come from downwind, and the geometry of the drive only functions from one side of the gully. One afternoon, 10,000 years ago, recovered from the order of bones in a ditch, then go north to southern Alberta, to a place called Head Smashed in Buffalo Jump. A sandstone cliff about 10 meters high, On the plateau above it, drive lanes, lines of stacked stone cairns, hundreds upon hundreds of them, running for kilometers across the grass, narrowing as they approach the edge. Below the cliff, bone deposits reaching about 11 meters deep. The site was in use for close to 6,000 years. Those cairns are not weapons, they are infrastructure. Somebody carried and stacked those stones long before any herd arrived, possibly generations before. And their grandchildren inherited a landscape that had been quietly rebuilt to kill. You can probably finish the sentence yourself now. Go back through every technique. The persistence hunt killed the animal with its own heat. The hunter arrived to something that could no longer stand. The ambush killed it with ignorance. It never knew a person was there. The poison killed it with chemistry, on a delay, somewhere else entirely, hours after everyone had walked away. The drive killed it with terrain that had been prepared before it was born. The Neanderthal at the elephant did not kill it either. Started a clock, and the clock did the work. Not one of those is a fight. Your ancestors did not defeat large animals. They arranged for large animals to already be defeated, and then walked up to collect the result. Say it in one line. Every big animal your ancestors ate had lost before the killing started. Once you see it, you can see why it had to be that way. An elephant's body is a masterpiece of the 6 seconds around contact. Mass, hide, reach, tusks. The ability to remove you from the world before your arms finish moving. Inside those 6 seconds, you have no answer. You never evolved one. Your species never got a claw, never got a fang, never got a hide worth the name. What your lineage did instead was refuse to hold the contest there. You moved the fight out of the moment and into time. Into 4 hours, the animal's temperature could not survive. Into 2 days, a beetle toxin needed. Into a season of stacked stones. A decade of learned terrain. 1,000 years of accumulated knowledge about how one particular species behaves at one particular waterhole in one particular month. Nothing else on Earth can fight you in that dimension. Not because animals are stupid. Elephants are not stupid, and neither are wolves. But nothing else can hold a plan longer than its own attention span, and nothing else can inherit one. A lion cannot be handed the results of a hunt that happened before it was born. You can. That is the whole thing. That is the only real advantage you have ever had. Which is why the spear is the least interesting object in this story. The spear is the receipt. The transaction happened somewhere else, in the days and the heads and the hours, before anyone got close enough to use it. There is a shadow across all of this, and it would be dishonest to leave it out. Between roughly 50,000 and 10,000 years ago, on nearly every landmass your ancestors walked into, the largest animals disappeared. The mammoths, the mastodons, giant ground sloths the size of cars, the straight-tusked elephants at Neumark-Nord, the armored glyptodonts of South America, Australia's Diprotodon. The climate was also lurching in that window, and the argument about how much of it was ice and how much of it was people has run for 60 years without a settlement. Serious researchers hold serious positions on both sides. What nobody argues about is the timing, and the machinery that did it is still installed in you. You still have 2 to 4 million sweat glands. Your Achilles is still a spring. Your breathing is still unlocked from your stride. Your shoulder is still a catapult. Your neck still carries a ligament that only makes sense at speed. You will almost certainly never run an animal to death. And the equipment is sitting in the box regardless, fully assembled, waiting. The mind is still there too, and it is louder. You take a cost today for a payoff you cannot see. You cooperate with people you will never meet. You put money into something for 30 years. You study for an exam that is 4 months away. You tell your child something your grandmother told you, and you do not entirely know why it matters, only that it does. You are still stacking cairns for a herd that has not arrived. And a lot of what feels wrong about modern life is that same faculty running with nothing worth hunting at the end of it. The patience that could run a kudu into the ground is aimed at a spreadsheet. The vigilance that read the drag mark of a tired hoof now reads notifications. The planning that laid stone across an entire plateau now lays obligations across a calendar. The system works exactly as designed. It has simply lost the animal. So here is a question worth sitting with, and worth putting below. Out there, at 41 degrees with nothing in your hands but a stick, which part of you would have done the killing? the running or the waiting. You still have no claws, no fangs, no armor, no venom, no speed. What you have is a body that keeps going after everything else has stopped, and a mind that already knows how the afternoon ends, hours before the animal does. That was always the weapon. You are still carrying it. If the world you came from feels a little closer now, that's exactly the point. Subscribe, and every week we'll uncover another piece of who you used to be.